Hello everyone, welcome to Kalam's answer writing session for the day. So today I have a question to discuss with you all. In fact, I have two questions to discuss with you all. So the first question was actually opened up to you all yesterday. It was a question on demographic dividend. We placed it under economics, under GS3, under the subtopic of skill development, and so on. Okay, the second question I'm going to discuss is about forest fires. The question of forest fires can be categorized into a semi-static and a semi-current affairs question. In general, it could be characterized as a static question under disaster management, but also because we've been having a lot of forest fires in the past few years. We had the 2016 Uttarakhand fire incident, and then recently in Bandipur Reserve we have incidents, and then we have forest fire incidents in Madhya Pradesh, Maharashtra, and so on. All these things have been occurring in recent times, so it can also be categorized under a current affairs question. So it's semi-static and a semi-current affairs based question, but whatever be the case, we're going to discuss it today. So first of all, we're going to talk about this question on India's demographic dividend, and then we will move forward and see that question, and eventually I'll open up a new question for you all to think about, sleep on that question, and come back tomorrow with your comments, and then I'll try and analyze what you've done right, what you've done wrong, and so on, and eventually we'll have a discussion about that question anyway towards the night at 9 p.m. tomorrow. So let's come back to today's question. Today's question, is on India's demographic dividend. It's on economics. The prerequisites we already know, using economics based terms, using committee reports, and so on, SDGs if possible, putting these things in the answer. All these things are going to increase the richness of your answer. So immediately what I do, I look at the question and then I think about this framework in my mind. What framework? The introduction, body, and conclusion framework. So what are the points that I'm going to write under this? What are the subheadings that I would evolve? India's demographic dividend is morphing into a nightmare. Okay, discuss this statement in the context of recently released UN Human Development Index. Suggest the required measures to reap the benefits of India's huge demographic dividend. Okay, so this is basically a lengthy question. It has been asked for a 10 marker. So I quickly have to segregate this question, convert this question into different subheadings, which I would address. I'll put in one or two extra subheadings, which I would address briefly only to increase the holistic nature of the answer. Okay, so what are the subheadings that I would come up with? The first thing I know that I definitely have to talk about is the measures, because it has been clearly asked. So it's asking me to talk about the measures that are required to improve or reap the demographic dividend and increase the economic wealth, decrease the concentration of wealth, ameliorate poverty, and so on, all these things. So it's asking me the measures. I'll talk about the measures. The second thing that I know that I have to talk about is this discussion. It is asking me to discuss how demographic dividend is being converted into a nightmare or a demographic disaster per se. So I'll also talk about DD being converted into a nightmare. Okay, so so these two things have been directly asked by the question. Okay, so what else do I need to do? What else am I missing that I have to put in order to strictly lie within the mandate of the question? It is this particular point. He is asking me to discuss about this thing in the context of recently released Human Development Index. How about I talk about the report? What has it said? What is our rank? What is our rank in terms of life expectancy? How did we do in terms of malnutrition and educational outcomes, and so on? How did we do in terms of other indicators that are there in Human Development Index? Okay, good. So by talking about the recent report, I'm also adding the current affairs aspect into the question. Okay, and then I'm moving forward and talking about how demographic dividend is being morphed into a nightmare, and then I'll move forward and talk about the measures. Okay, so I've evolved the skeleton of my answer, and then the conclusion is one or two line conclusion, which is going to be neither specific nor too vague. How do I start the introduction? You could talk about demographic dividend, what it is, and how India's average working age is less than 33 or 34 years according to so and so report, and so on. You could talk about that, but in order to strictly lie within the mandate of the question, how about explaining HDI? Why not talk about HDI? Why not talk about the Human Development Index as such, and talk about the the different components of this human development index. By doing so, you are being very specific, you're being rich in terms of your content, you're densifying your answer. So that is how you could come up with an introduction which is strictly in the mandate of the question. So this is going to be is going to be my structure of the answer. So let us see if this person has done the same thing. We will evaluate the answer and then we will see if we can pick holes in that particular answer. Okay, so let's see. I'll maximize this for y'all so that it becomes clearly visible. Okay, so this should do. So this is what he has done. Human Development Index is a composite statistic. It is a composite which is used to rank countries in terms of the human development. It is basically an indicator. It has been developed by UNDP. It ranks countries based on 3 composite indicators like life expectancy, education, and per capita income. These are the 3 parameters on which countries are ranked. Okay, Human Development Index comes up with a figure based on this, which lies between 0 and 1, and using that score it is going to rank the countries. And if you look at the recent Human Development Index and the report, Human Development Index report, he should have mentioned UNDP here. It would have added value to his answer. Anyway, so the rank is 129 out of 189 countries, and then the poor per capita income is poor, malnutrition, poverty, lifestyle diseases are rampant. Sri Lanka, Bhutan, China performed better. So he is basically giving you a snapshot of the Human Development Index. So this has become a content dense answer so far. He's giving you bare facts. He's telling you how the numbers are. He's telling you how our neighbors are doing much better than us and so on. And he's telling you the problems that we are facing. So this is basically a good value addition to my answer, and he's doing it in a less space. So I am impressed. So he's supposed to talk about what next? He's supposed to talk about how demographic dividend is converted into a demographic nightmare. That is what he is doing here. How does he do it? He's basically telling you in this point that India is adding 1 million workforce per month. Every month we are adding 1 million workforce, which comes down to how much? 12 million per year. Are we creating enough jobs? No. When you do not create enough jobs for this rising workforce, it is going to create a problem. So basically he's trying to point that out here. This 1 million workforce per month point is a good point. And then he's talking about poor employability. Not only are we able to create good jobs, but also whatever jobs are there, the people that are coming into the workforce are not employable. How does he say it? For example, less than 18% of Indian engineers are employable because of their poor skills. This has been pointed out by McKinsey report, by the way. This could have been mentioned. Even if it was not mentioned, it is fine, because he is already talking about too many dense points. He talked about HDI in the above paragraph and so on, which is fine. But if you know, just write it. Okay, so poor employability, he's telling you that we're not able to create enough jobs. Whatever jobs we have, they are not being filled because people do not have good skills. Why will I employ somebody if they do not have good skills? And only 18% of our engineers are having good skills. Okay, so this is basically another point which is telling you that the workforce that is coming up, it is not getting good jobs. So what happens next when people do not have jobs, when people do not have disposable income in their pockets, and they don't have nothing to do? They become very exhausted mentally. They become very restless. Okay, so that creates social conflicts. That is the breeding ground for all kinds of bad things. Okay, so what does it lead to? Vandalism, communalism, riots, demographic disaster, and so on. So demographic dividend is converted into a demographic disaster. So he has successfully established that through this chain of logic. Good. Let's see what he does next. He says there might arise anti-government protests, like in the case of Arab Spring, Turkey. Good. Arab Spring, Jasmine Revolution, all these things are the same thing. In those areas, government was not able to produce enough jobs. In addition to that, there were also political problems. There was no democratic decentralization. There was no participation for people. But over and above all this, a common man was hurt because he didn't have a job. His daily goods were become pricey, were become very expensive. So all these things led to an Arab Spring Revolution back then in 2011. starting from Tunisia, which was the hotbed of this revolution. Anyway, that is besides the point. So this anti-government protests might increase if demographic dividend moves towards a disaster. Okay, and then he says further, if demographic dividend is not reaped, there may not be enough money to take care of them when they age. So this is a very interesting point. Currently, we have so many people who are in the range of 30 to 35. If these people are not given jobs, what happens is enough wealth is not generated in the economy. We do not have surplus of wealth in the economy. But say after 30 to 40 years, these people will become old. When these people become old, the government is supposed to take care of their health. The government is supposed to take care of their recreational needs, their insurance premiums, and so on. All these things will not be possible if the wealth is not generated right now. That is a basic difficulty that we are facing at the moment. That is what is basically messing up with the minds of the policymakers. They are not having an idea about how to handle this situation. So this leads to unbearable insurance payments, health expenditure, and so on. All these things we have discussed. And then he is talking about associated points. There will be poor GDP growth, there will be inflation, there will be informalization of workforce. If there are no jobs in the formal industry, companies, what will they do? They will move towards contractual labor or casual labor, because they can pay them less and still get the work done. So overall the economy becomes informalized. And what are the problems with informalized sector? There will be poor working conditions, there won't be facilities, there won't be insurance payments, and so on. So these problems arise, and then there is inequity in wealth. So all these points he has established. He is telling you that the demographic dividend is moving towards a demographic disaster. Both are DDs. This is disaster, this is dividend. Keep these things in mind. This is what he has established so far. But he introduces his answer using the facts from Human Development Index. So he has basically warmed up the answer. Now what I want to see solutions to this problem. What are the solutions? Okay. So basically, prima facie, when I see these three solutions with several subparts, I immediately realize that he is handling this in terms of his human development index only. What it means is, human development index का 3 criteria क्या था? एक educational attainment था, and then income था, and the next thing we had was health. So he's smartly trying to discuss demographic dividend in the context of human development index, and I want you to notice that. Okay, he could have explicitly written in the context of human development index. That would have been better, because if the examiner is willing to put in the effort, he'll understand that these are the indicators that are directly related to human development index. Otherwise he would just think that these are normal subheadings. So don't leave anything for the interpretation of the examiner. Okay. So educational improvement, how do you do it? Higher educational expenditure, vocational education, skill development, revamping public schools. Good. Income increment through self-employment, vertical mobility through skilling, Pradhan Mantri Kaushal Vikas Yojana, FDI liberalization, banking reforms. Health improvement through national health policy, Ayushman Bharat, etc. Okay, so he has pointed out so many points here in using the 3 prongs of the educational improvement, income improvement, and he is also talking about health improvement. Okay, good. Let's see how he concludes. He says reaping demographic dividend, as in creating enough jobs and giving them payments and increasing the wealth of the country. This is very important for inclusivity and realization of our preambular values. That is a good point, a good conclusion. Thus it has to be taken forward in a mission mode. Almost everything is good about this conclusion, except the fact that he has not respected the contours of the question. So what are my comments on this answer? So the first thing I want you all to notice that it is a well-rounded answer. He has addressed all the different subparts of the question. He has stayed within the mandate of the question. What are the improvements that he could have done? In this way forward, it would have been better if this segregation included more schemes. Okay, he could have talked about more schemes in educational improvement. He already talked about these things here, but more number of schemes would have been a better approach, because that increases the density of your answer. This part has been addressed really well. I'm impressed. And human development index and its points are good. So overall this is a good answer. This is an above average answer, but this point could have involved more schemes. But as such, this answer itself would have fetched good marks. So we will move forward and then see the next question. Okay, so the next question was on forest fires. So Let me maximize or minimize the screen for you all to be visible. Okay, so this is visible now. So what are the reasons for the frequent occurrences of the forest fires in the country? Discuss the measures to control them. This is a simple question if you can think about it in terms of subheadings. It is asking you only two things. First, you have to tell them the causes. Second, you have to tell them the solution. So far, so good. Previously, we were trying to discuss complicated questions. There is nothing complicated as such in a question. He gives you a statement. He is asking you to talk about it in the light of something else. So that creates some kind of vagueness in your mind. You don't know how to create the subheadings. You don't know how to create these different paragraphs or points that you would like to. We've discussed a good number of questions on that particular model. Now we will see a simple question. This question is just a two-themed question. It has only two themes. It is very simple. Okay, it is asking you to talk about the causes, and then he is asking you to talk about the solutions. Okay, so far so good. And then you move forward and talk about the conclusion. You start with the introduction. How do you introduce? You can't define forest fires per se, because that is not adding value to your answer. How will you define forest fire? There is fire in the forest and that is forest fire? No, that is not how you're supposed to do it. You could talk about the different incidents that are happening, or you could talk about the recent forest survey of India report, which says that 20% of India's forests are prone to forest fires. That is one way of introducing, right? Also, you could talk about a current affairs issue, in which you could talk about, in recent times we have faced several forest fire incidents in the country, like in 2016 Uttarakhand incident, and in 2019 Bandipur Tiger Reserve incident, and so on. In this context, we have to talk about forest fires and so on. So that is another way of introducing your answer. So this is the current affairs approach, this is the forest survey of India approach, and there is a definitional approach we won't employ in this particular case. This is not like the previous question in which he is asking you about demographic dividend. Defining demographic dividend would have made more sense, but then defining something so lay or so simple as forest fires doesn't really add value to your answer. I hope you get my point. So we've quickly evolved the subheadings of the question. Now we will move forward and see what this person has done. Okay. By the way, where do we place this question? We place this question in disaster management. So this is the question, and we have evolved the subheadings. We will move forward and see how he has written the answer. If he has written a dense answer and he has written any other subheading as such. Okay, so if I were to enrich my answer, by the way, what is another subheading that I could put up? How about talking about the impact? We are talking about the causes, right? The causes for the forest fires are so and so things. There are natural causes, there are man-made causes, and there are accidental causes, and so on and so forth. And because of this, it is creating such a negative impact in the economy or the country as such. So you have to take up these solutions. That would be a very holistic approach. Okay. So what I want you to notice is that these subheadings that we are evolving, there is no hard and fast rules about evolving these subheadings. True, the crux of the question has to be reflected in the subheadings. So these two subheadings have to be there, but whether you write impact or not is basically your choice, and I am asking you to take the choice because it is going to increase the richness of your answer. First thing, it is going to distinguish your answer from every other answer around you, which is the second thing. Third, it is going to create some kind of variety in the minds of the examiner. Think about this. You sit down and everybody is talking about the causes and everybody is giving you the solutions. However good the points are, I would like to see something new as an examiner. So why not do that? But there is a catch. You cannot spend too much time or space on this particular edition which you are doing, because that is not the crux of the question. The crux has to be handled well in terms of time and space. Whatever additions you do, you have to do it briefly. You have to do it only so as to create some kind of newness, some kind of richness for your answer. Good. So we will see what this person has done. Okay, so let me see if I can maximize this. Okay, so this is not working today, so let's see how we will make do with what we have. So recent report of forest survey of India. Okay, it says as much as 21% of our forests are prone to forest fires. Okay, so this is basically a good introduction, is using the report. to substantiate his point. And then he gives you recent examples: 2016 Uttarakhand fire, 2019 Bandipur Tiger Reserve fire. So he's basing you giving out some kind of density to his answer in his introduction itself. Let's see what he does next. He is basically trying to segregate his answer. He's talking about reasons, good, and he has segregated them into natural reasons and artificial reasons. So what are the natural reasons? Lightning and thunderstorms, and then you have low humidity and extreme dryness causing fires when trees brush against each other. So there are a couple of causes which cause forest fires in the in dry areas or even in Himalayan areas and so on. So what are these causes? One is during the summer these trees become dry and there is less humidity. So when these trees brush against each other, there will be sparks and then there will be a fire. First thing. And secondly, sometimes the stones in the forest, because of wind or because of some other erosional action, move, and then they brush against each other, there will be a spark, and then it could lead to a forest fire. Also, sometimes when you have a thunderstorm, there will be lightning strikes the tree gets caught with a fire, and then the fire spreads. So these are basically the natural causes. What are the artificial causes? Cultivation of fire prone chir pine trees in Garhwal Himalayas for their economic value. So in the Garhwal Himalayas, Uttarakhand Himalayas, etc., what we have are chir pine trees which basically give out needles. These needles, when they become dry, they are very prone to fire. They catch fire instantly. Okay, so previously we used to have broadleaf trees. Broadleaf trees are basically those which are suited to the vegetation of this place. But these Britishers and the people who post-independence policies that were there, because chir pine had its economic value, they started cultivating these plants more, these trees more, and these trees are causing so and so problem now. Okay, what else? Jamming and podu, or this is basically shifting cultivation. So the tribals set fire to a place and then they use it for cultivation and then they leave and so on, but this is also a cause of forest fires. And then tourists and visitors, they basically leave out inflammable materials like cigarette stubs, BDs, etc. So these create forest fires if not taken care of well. What else can be done? What else is the cause? Okay, so how about farm residues? Punjab and Haryana areas are very famously known for burning the farm residues. Even Delhi High Court and the Supreme Court have talked about this, and they asked them not to burn the residue. The government has come up with several schemes and so on, which is besides the point. But burning these farm residues in the fringes of forests, what it does is that it causes this farm residue fire to spread into the forest, and then it becomes very difficult to control it. So that is one reason. And then to conceal illicit felling of trees. So there are people who poach these trees. Some people want sandalwood, some people want redwood, and so on. These people try and fell the forest. Once they do it, they don't want to get caught, so they burn the whole forest, which burn the other trees, because the other trees are not useful for them anyway. So let's just burn them so the government won't know about those trees which we have stolen. Okay, so that is one other artificial reason for forest fire. So we've seen a good number of reasons. So there are other reasons as well which we could talk about, but these 5 points are good. They have added good density to my answer. The answer was introduced well, and he did a good thing by segregating the answer into natural causes and artificial causes. Had he not done that, it would have created some kind of cluttering, okay, which is not good. As segregated as you are, as much segregation as you do, it is going to show the clarity of thought you have. Okay, and let's see what he does next. He's telling you about the impact. We were talking about the impact, right? So he's telling you about the impact. So this is basically a value addition, and it has to be addressed only briefly, and he did that. He played the trick. He did it within 1/3 of the space. It is even less than 1/3 of the space. What are the impacts? Tribal livelihoods, they'll be disturbed. Loss in animal and forest wealth, because of the trees that are getting burnt. Whatever forest we have inside, they get whatever animals we have inside, they get killed, and so on. And then there is loss of carbon sink, increased global warming, loss of life of tourists and trekkers. Recently there was an incident in which 20 trekkers lost their life because of forest fire in Tamil Nadu, if I'm not wrong. So anyway, so he has pointed out a well-rounded impact of this incident of forest fires. Good. Now he has to talk about the measures. So far he has answered the question really well. He has talked about a very good number of of points in terms of natural causes, artificial causes. He's telling me the impact caused by this particular phenomenon of forest fire. So all I want is to see the measures. When I talk about the measures, I would like to someplace see about Hyogo, its continuation Sendai, and its Sendai and Indian counterpart NDMA. These three things, when you put them in your disaster management answer, they basically enrich your answer. And you can always put these things in your disaster management answers, because these are basically broad concepts. They talk about almost every kind of disaster. So I would like to see some of these things in my answer, so I know that the student has read about these things. So what does he do? Practice of counter fire based on Yellowstone National Park model. What Yellowstone National Park model does is, if this is the forest, let's say this is some kind of line within the forest fire is moving in this direction. What these people do is that they set up a fire in this direction. So this fire goes, and overall this parched area will prevent the fire from spreading. Okay, so that is basically a fire break or a counter fire, or increased vigilance through fire watches, separate set of people. And then you have prompt detection using satellites. Why not use satellites or sensors, mapping satellites and so on, to manage the forest fires that are there, promptly detect them when they arise. And then there have to be modern technologies like fire beaters and Pulaski tools. So these are basically technical points that he is using. Pulaski tool usage is a good innovation. It's a very good point. And then he's talking about a scheme, Forest Fire Control Project, okay, which is assisted by UNDP. That is a good point. Cultivation of broadleaf trees instead of chirpine to prevent catching of fires. We spend few seconds, 20 to 30 seconds on the contrast between broadleaf trees and the chirpines, and he's basically telling you the same point. Empowering locals through mock drills, education and awareness. These points are really good. These points are really dense. I've learned something new from these points. He's telling you about different projects. He's telling you about the technologies that are there, and he said fire beaters, Pulaski tools and so on. Overall, I'm satisfied. But all I wanted to see was this. Even without this, he would have fetched really good marks. There's no doubt about it. Probably if he talked about this in his conclusion, it would have been good. Let's see if he does that. Sadly, he doesn't. Adopting fire safe practices. Okay, there seems to be another point. It is talking about fire safe practices in factories, coal mines, chemical plants and so on. You have to take about good measures there. So you can also talk about fire safety audits, okay, district management taking care of the audit, and then you also can have people participation and so on. All these points can come up. So he could have used these points on NDMA, Hyogo and Sendai here. That would have been a good way to conclude the answer. But let's see what he does. He says overall center state coordination, good, must be improved to handle this hazard effectively and efficiently. This is a generic point. He should have used these points. He could have started out by saying overall center state coordination and adherence to frameworks like Hyogo and Sendai would have can help handle the situation on forest fires much better. That would have been a really good really good conclusion. Okay, so we've discussed two questions today. One was on demographic dividend. It came under GS3, and then there is another question that we discussed today on GS3 itself. It was on forest fires. So we have learned something from this discussion. We've learned how to introduce an answer, how to create subheadings in our body, and then we've learned how to conclude an answer. So these are the sample answers that we have written. Okay, so you should also go back home, evolve notes less than 1/4 of a 4-page, and then try writing these answers. Try writing at least one answer per day. If you're not able to write lot many answers because you're preparing for optional or because you're preparing for your prelims and so on, try writing at least one answer per day within the time limit. Time limit is really important when you write an answer. Some people question this basic framework about the handwriting not being good. First thing, some people tell us that the handwriting is the same every day. I wanted to tell you that we are trying to maintain uniformity, first thing, and secondly, we are trying to do this in the required time frame, and because we want you all to know that you can only do so much when you have 7 minutes. If we come up with a PPT in which we tell you about hundreds of points which you could write, there's no use, because you don't really know towards the end when you write in the exam what to write and what not to write. By showing this real time answer, what we are trying to do is to tell you all that there is only so much that is possible. you can only do so much, and in this, how do you perform better? That seems to be the trick for the examination, right? And all you have to do is to get used to this kind of structuring the answer, and then you have to repeat this performance in every answer of your question paper, which is a ball game, which is a different ball game altogether, but we will talk about it. Okay, we have slowly and steadily built up a framework of answering the questions, and we are learning our way through. We will also improve ourselves and talk about how to answer a 20 question paper ka whole 3 hours exam. What are the tricks that go into doing that will come up in due time. Presently we are doing this. Okay, so I'll introduce the question for tomorrow. So what is the question for tomorrow? Managing energy related issues in India, present challenges of coordination, optimal resource utilization, critically analyze the statement and suggest suitable steps to be adopted. So this is basically about energy. And energy, you have coal, you have oil and gas, and you have petroleum, which most of it is being imported, and then recently we are trying nuclear technology is being upgraded, and then there is bioenergy, renewable energy, wind energy, solar energy, so on. So all these kinds of energy come under the game. So managing these energy related issues are having some problems. There are certain challenges in this particular case. So what are they? He's not asking you about what they are, he's asking you about critically analyzing the statement. So what are the tricks that you would employ in answering the question? Think about the subheadings: introduction, body, and the conclusion. Tell me what the subheadings could be in this particular case, what the introduction could be. Would you like to start with the fact based? Would you like to start with the definitional approach, and so on? Let's see how this comes out tomorrow. I'll come up with an answer to this particular question tomorrow, and then I'll introduce another question. It's an ongoing process and we are improving day by day, and we will do so. Okay, thank you.